The story of the Tower of Babel in Genesis chapter 11, verses 1 through 9. It's going to be an interesting read. I'm going to be talking about some interpretations that I'm sure a lot of you have never heard before. As always, I encourage all points of view and ways of thought. So as always, I pray that everything that we share here today would be a great blessing to you, increase your knowledge of the scriptures, your knowledge of the things of heaven, your relationship with God, and your knowledge of the truth. As always, I have the screen divided in two here. The left-hand side is from the New King James, and the right-hand side is the Septuagint. So let's do this. It's only 9 verses we're going to be talking about tonight. Just the first 9 verses of this chapter, because the rest of the chapter is another genealogy. Don't you love the genealogies, right? But tonight we're talking about the Tower of Babel. Notice that even the title here is called the Tower of Babel. Well, since we're looking at the title here, by the way, the title's not even in the original manuscripts. The title was added by the translators. Did you guys know that this story speaks more about the city of Babel than about the Tower of Babel? There are 3 times it says city. City, talking about the city of Babel. So that'd be in verse 4, talks about the city. Verse 5 talks about the city. And verse 8 talks about the city, literally saying city, city, and city. But if you look up tower, there's only twice. Only twice does it say the word tower. So we have twice in the actual verses themselves, once in verse 4 and once in verse 5. But we have the word city 3 times. So that's, 50% more. Yet, we all refer to this story as the Tower of Babel. Really, it should be called just simply the city of Babel. Or you could say Babylon, because this is kind of like the beginnings of Babylon. The word Babel and Babylon are synonymous. Genesis chapter 10, verse 10. Over on the left-hand side of the screen, you'll see the word Babel there. I'm going to click on Tools, and we're going to go down to Interlinear, and we're going to look up the word Babel. And look at this. It says, the word means confusion, but it's Babel, i.e., that is Babylon, including Babylonia and the Babylonian Empire. Babel, Babylon. So we have the story of Babylon, okay? And it doesn't always talk about the tower. It talks more about the city than it talks about the tower. The tower is a symbol, especially in the old, in ancient days. A tower would be almost like a status symbol of the city. Even today, some of the cities we have in the world are known by its towers, right? So even more so in the ancient days, because the tower would be the defense. It would be part of the defense that's used. You could see if the enemies are coming. It would give you, a bird's eye view, literally. And so a tower is kind of like the defense. It is both defensive and offensive in a way, because you could also even shoot from a tower as well. Of course, in those days it would be bow and arrow, but I know these guys were pretty good at their archery, very good, and also a status symbol. Verse 1, now the whole earth had one language and one speech. Okay, so mentioned this a little bit in passing last night in part 14. In Genesis chapter 10, the chapter before, it talks about more than one language existing. It's like, what? I thought it says here one language and one speech. Hold on. Hold your horses, okay? Because this word one and this word language may not mean what you think it means. So let's go back to Genesis chapter 10 for a moment. Back to Genesis chapter 10, we have 3 times that it talks about different languages. You know that? This is before Babel, different languages. So just to kind of recap what we were talking about last night, again, I'm looking at the left-hand side of the screen, and it goes into explaining the sons of Japheth and all of his sons and sons of sons. And then in verse 5, from these, that'd be all the sons and the descendants of Japheth, the coastland peoples of the Gentiles were separated into their lands, everyone according to his language. Everyone according to his language, according to their families, according to their nations. Okay, so we have division, separation between these tribes, if you want to talk about dangerous tribe, separation between the people according to their language. So that obviously would mean if you don't have any separation and they all have one language, that would make sense. But if you have a division, let's say even 2 groups of people according to their language, that tells us that there were 2 different languages there. If these people are divided in 3, then of course there'd be 3 different languages, because it says according to his language. There's separation or division according to his language. If they're divided in 5 or 10, there'd be 10 different languages because they're divided according to their language. So if they were divided in 10, that would be 10 different languages. Now, once again, so that's verse 5, by the way. Once again, verse 20, it talks about this kind of thing as well. So verse 20, it says, these were the sons of Ham, according to their families, according to their languages. Languages. We got Japheth and all of his descendants divided according to their languages. So there are languages within Japheth, it just himself and all of his descendants. So they have multiple languages, just that branch of the family. Then we have Ham and his descendants. They also have their own languages. So we have that branch of the family as well, the family of Noah, that would be. So we see here, again, according to their languages. Moving on to verse 31. Again, this is talking about Shem now, right? The third son of Noah. These were the sons of Shem, according to their families, according to their languages. According to their languages. Yeah. So there we have scriptural evidence that there were more than one language per son of, so we got Noah divided in 3 sons, right? Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And every one of those sons had their own descendants, and they all had different languages. It doesn't say how many languages there were. Just says divided, they were divided into this many according to the languages, or divided. There we have some evidence within the scripture itself that we have more than one language existing before Babylon. Now, any kind of linguist or historian would tell you that there is plenty of extra biblical evidence that there were languages that existed before the dating of the Tower of Babel. Different languages. Okay, so back to Genesis chapter 11, verse 1. Now the whole earth had one language and one speech. Okay, so you say, what happened here? What's this mean? I'm sure people can try to bend over and play the twister and bend over backwards to try to make everything work, to say, well, maybe they all had one, maybe they all just uniform, like maybe they all just kind of threw away everything and they only kept one language after all. Yeah, I don't think so. You can make up whatever you want to make up, but let's look into the Hebrew and what these words mean. So Genesis chapter 11, again on the left-hand side, I am looking into the interlinear, and it says here, and the whole earth, Eretz. Now this is something right here. We spoke about this pertaining to Noah and the flood, but here we are again, this word Eretz, or Eretz, Hebrew. This word doesn't necessarily mean the whole, it doesn't necessarily mean the whole earth. This word Eretz in the Hebrew is very ambiguous. It can mean everything from your backyard to the entire world. It could mean everything. The word Eretz is more accurately translated into the English word land. Earth is not a very good translation of this word. It's better to say the whole land. Then you got to ask the question, what land? You look up the word Eretz in the Hebrew dictionary, it will tell you that it can even mean a field. It doesn't have to mean the entire earth. So this word Eretz can be global, but it can be local too. And I do believe, just as in the story of the flood, that I think with all the evidence that we have, both biblically, if you will, and extra biblically through the historians and the archaeological discoveries and all that kind of stuff, I think that myself personally, I lean more to a localization of this word as opposed to a globalization of the word. And I think that using this word and making it sound global I'm just using the word can bring reproach upon the scriptures themselves, if not the name of the Lord, because, I think that we have a lot of history and a lot of archaeological discoveries and a lot of things that would tell us that before Babel, there were other languages. So if this was global, then there's one or two things. Either the one language phrase in the Hebrew doesn't mean what it sounds like it means in the English, or it does mean that, and the word land means something different than we think it means. It's either one or the other, or you can say all of the historians are wrong, all the archaeological evidence, or just turn a blind eye to all the evidence that we ever have and say it's all wrong, and our interpretation of Genesis 11:1 is right. I don't recommend going that route. I don't think there's much evidence behind it. And I think that someone who would do this without the evidence, I think it can display a lot of arrogance and denialism. Okay? So the word land or earth here, when it says the whole earth, it literally is the whole Eretz, which can mean a country, can mean a county, it could mean a continent, it could mean the world. Again, I don't want to misrepresent what it could mean. It could mean the entire world, but again, given the evidence that we already see, I don't think that we have a whole lot of evidence to go on by saying this means the whole world. Anyways, moving on. This word Eretz was of one Echad. See? Echad. This is the same word, Echad, that's used in the Hebrew when it says when a man marries a woman, the two will become one flesh. Echad flesh. So they're unified. So they're in lockstep with each other. So, they're in tune with each other. So they understand each other. So this word Echad, just as I spoke of before in Genesis chapter 1, Echad day, it can be talking about a unification of many things. You can have, a whole nation. You can say this is, we are all Echad. We are one. Echad, Saphah, is what is used for the Hebrew for language. So this word means lip, literally lip. Okay. Most of the time, the vast majority of the time in the scriptures, it's translated as lip. So it means lip. So Echad lip, a unified lip, if you will, could be talking about the unification or the harmonization of language, or you can say languages that are unified in a way. In other words, you can have a group of people that all speak different languages, yet they are Echad lip. In other words, they all understand each other. They're all their communication is open, and they're all one, yet they're not one. They're Echad. They're unified. Just like the man and the woman, they're one when they're married, but they're not one. They're two in a way. You see what I'm saying? So we can have many different languages here, and they can all still be Echad. But this word lip is like, in the English we have the phrase or the expression lippy. You get lippy, right? So it's rather the speech, the communication is unified. In other words, there is a communication system that is very fluent. Not that there is literally one language, but rather there is a unification of the languages because they can all translate fluently. And they can all understand each other efficiently. And they can work efficiently and fluently, even though there are many languages. They're Echad lip. They're of one understanding, if you will. Communication. Lippy. Communication. Okay? Now, the rest of it says one lip and of one speech. So, what does this mean? So, we have the one Saphah, a unified communication, the unification of lips, if you will, the lippiness of the people were unified. And then you have the Dabar, it says Echad again, one Echad Dabar. Look at this. Dabar. Well, why is it translated as and of here when it's not really and of, it's speech. You see this? It's the same Hebrew word, exactly the same. So again, it's kind of confusing because what does Dabar mean? Does it mean and of, or does it mean speech? Why do we have it translated as and of here? It's kind of like a redundancy. It's Dabar, Echad, Dabar. Now I understand this Dabar means words. Take a look here in the Hebrew dictionary. Yes. So looking at the amount of times in different words that is translated from Dabar, the vast majority of them is translated as simply word. So it's kind of a redundant statement. Yeah, so it's like Dabar, Echad, Dabar. So first we have the Echad Saphah, the unification, the one lip, if you will, the unification of the communication. But then you have the Dabar, Echad, Dabar. The words, the unification of the words. So this is not just simply talking about like the languages, if you will, but rather what is actually said. Like the word, like do you have a word from the Lord? Like do you have a word for me? Like do you know, for example, the Ten Commandments, for example, is literally the word for Ten Commandments is the same word for for word here. The Dabar, it's the same word. Again, I'm going to prove this to you guys over here on the left. Exodus chapter 34, verse 28. And you go down into the interlinear Hebrew, and you see this. It says in the very bottom, so this is the 10 Commandments. It says Dabar. Commandments? Dabar? I thought Dabar means words, you know? So really, the 10 Commandments are 10 words, not necessarily literal word as in one word, but rather a concept, 10 concepts. So what was Genesis chapter 11? What's Genesis chapter 11 talking about? The unification of the languages, the efficient understanding. You know, people were like polyglots, right? They were very they could understand all the languages there within that region anyway. Within that city, I should say, not necessarily region, but the city of Babel. So they could all understand each other very efficiently and effectively. And so they were of one language, in a way, Echad, unified language, just as a man and a woman, when they're married, they become one flesh. So they're not really one, literally, but rather unified. So the Echad language is not literally one, but rather multiple languages unified and demonstrated by the ability to communicate effectively and efficiently. Here at the city of Babel, we have a very effective communication system. You know, almost reminds you like of the internet today, doesn't it? Remember, Babel and Babylon are the same. It's the same name. So we have the unification of the languages and the unification of the sayings, the words, the concepts, the elements of communication are all, so it's unification thoroughly unified. That's the first verse, you know, where it says the whole earth had one language and one speech. So this does not necessarily mean what most people think it means. It doesn't necessarily mean, you know, because we're reading it in the English, and, you know, we're using just, you know, a simple method of understanding what we're reading here. But again, you know, we don't see how this word one and this word one is translated from a Hebrew word that can be used for talking about unification of many. And again, the word earth, even that, Eretz, can explain why, even if there was literally one language, how, you know, most people understand the story of the Tower of Babel to go. This word earth, which I think is a bad translation, it should say land, which can mean any kind of land. It could mean the city, simply only the city. It could mean a country, whatever. By the way, guys, the same word that's used for earth here is the same word that Israel uses for their country, by the way, Eretz. You know, the country of Israel, the nation of Israel today, they call themselves Haaretz, literally the Eretz. That country is the Eretz. So in this verse, the whole Eretz, which again, what does that mean in the Hebrew? Does it mean literally the whole earth, as some of the translators think that it, you know, we have the translators here thinking that that's what it means? Or does it mean, you know, a localization, a local piece of land, a city, a country, a continent? It doesn't tell us. In this one language and one speech, I do believe this is talking about the effective, talk about effectual, fervent, and efficient. Here we got effectual, fervent, and efficient communication. However they did it, I don't know how. It's basically what it means. They were able to communicate with one another very, very efficiently, very, very well. Mewa says Echad in their mission. Yeah, that's it. So you got many people and they all have one mission. So this is, yeah, they're Echad. They are unified in their mission. Same thing, yeah. As one language, one speech, literally one lip, one word is what it literally means, or one sayings, one word. I know of a rabbi who is quite fluent in Hebrew, and he always says that you lose 80%. That's 80% of the meaning in translation. So, you know, looking at what we just looked at here with just the first verse, it seems to me that sounds pretty accurate to me. You could lose 80% of the actual meaning of this in translation. Now, the Septuagint puts it a little bit differently. We have all the earth was one lip, and there was one language to all. Again, this word lip, I think I like that because again, that's more accurate to the Hebrew. But this word language, it should just say one word. to all. Dabar. The Syriac, the whole earth was of one language and one speech. So the Syriac, it tends to go, is a little bit like very similar with the Masoretic text. Then we have the Vulgate. Where are we here? Vulgate. Oh, we're not even in chapter 11 yet. The Vulgate. The earth was of one tongue and of the same speech. Okay, so again, there's many different ways you can interpret this. I think that there is room here to interpret that these people in Babel, the city of Babel, they had an amazing strength of communication. They had some means of communication that this was their power. This was their greatest strength, is their communication, their ability to unify, to be unified and to communicate effectively with one another. Let's go to verse 2 now. Genesis chapter 11, verse 2. And it came to pass, as they journeyed from the east, that they found a plain in the land of Shinar, and they dwelt there. Okay, so this is where Babel, modern day Iraq, as far as I understand, or in around that area. This is where Babylon first started, in the plain of the land of Shinar. Verse 3, then they said to one another, come, let us make bricks and bake them thoroughly. They had a brick for stone, and they had asphalt for mortar. Okay, the Syriac puts it a little bit different, and they said, each man to his neighbor, come, we may lay bricks, and we may burn them in fire, and we will burn them in fire. And they had brick for stone, and they had lime for mortar. Okay, so there is a story from our beloved Jewish people. Now, I think I might go to the Legends of the Jews for this, because the Legends of the Jews, very, very interesting stuff here. Okay, so I'm going to go to Legends of the Jews, Book 1, Chapter 4. The depravity of mankind says here, with the spread of mankind, corruption increased. While Noah was still alive, the descendants of Shem, Ham, and Japheth appointed princes over each of the three groups. Nimrod for the descendants of Ham, Joktan for the descendants of Shem, and Phanek for the descendants of Japheth. 10 years before Noah's death, the number of those subject to the three princes amounted to millions. When this great concourse of men came to Babylonia upon their journeyings, they said to one another, behold, the time is coming when, at the end of days, neighbor will be separated from neighbor, and brother from brother, and one will carry on war against the other. Go, let's build us a city and a tower, whose top may reach unto heaven, and let us make us a great name upon the earth. And now let us make bricks, and each one write his name upon his brick. All agreed to this proposal, with the exception of 12 pious men, Abraham among them. They refused to join the others. They were seized by the people and brought before three princes, to whom they gave the following reason for their refusal. We will not make bricks, nor remain with you, for we know that but one God, and him we serve. Even if you burn us in the fire together with the bricks, we will not walk in your ways. Nimrod and Phanek flew into such a passion over the 12 men that they resolved to throw them into the fire. Joktan, however, besides being a God-fearing man, was of close kin to the men on trial, and essayed to save them. He proposed to his two colleagues to grant them a 7 days respite. His plan was accepted, such deference being paid him as a primate among the three. The 12 were incarcerated in the house of Joktan. In the night, he charged 50 of his attendants to mount the prisoners upon mules and take them to the mountains. Thus they would escape the threatened punishment. Joktan provided them with food for a month. He was sure that in the meantime either a change of sentiment would come about and the people desist from their purpose, or God would help the fugitives. 11 of the prisoners assented to the plan with gratitude. Abraham alone rejected it, saying, behold, today we flee to the mountains to escape from the fire. But if wild beasts rush out of the mountains and devour us, or if food is lacking, so that we may die by famine, we shall be found fleeing before the people of the land and dying in our sins. Now, as the Lord lives, in whom I trust, I will not depart from this place wherein they have imprisoned me. And if I am to die through my sins, then will I die by the will of God, according to his desire. In vain Joktan endeavored to persuade Abraham to flee. He persisted in his refusal. He remained behind alone in the prison house, while the other 11 made their escape at the expiration of the set term, and when the people returned and demanded the death of the 12 captives. Joktan could produce only Abraham. His excuse was that the rest had broken loose during the night. The people were about to throw themselves upon Abraham and cast him into the lime kiln. Suddenly, an earthquake was felt. The fire darted from the furnace, and all who were standing round about, 84,000 of the people, were consumed, while Abraham remained untouched. Thereupon, he repaired to his 11 friends in the mountains, and told them of the miracle that had befallen for his sake. They all returned with him, and unmolested by the people, they gave praise and thanks to God. By the way, guys, you know that the term Ur of the Chaldees, Abraham, Ur of the Chaldees, from the Ur of the Chaldees, the story is that the reason why he was called like Abraham from Ur of the Chaldees is because that's talking about this fire. Abraham was saved from the fire, basically. Nimrod. The first among the leaders of the corrupt men was Nimrod. His father Cush had married his mother at an advanced age, and Nimrod, the offspring of this belated union, was particularly dear to him as the son of his old age. He gave him the clothes made of skins with which God had furnished Adam and Eve at the time of their leaving paradise. So in other words, the same skins that Adam and Eve wore in Garden of Eden was given to Nimrod, according to this. It says Cush himself had gained possession of them through Ham. From Adam and Eve they had descended to Enoch, and from him to Methuselah and to Noah, and the last had taken them with him into the ark. When the inmates of the ark were about to leave their refuge, Ham stole the garments and kept them concealed, finally passing them on to his firstborn son Cush. Cush, in return, hid them for many years. When his son Nimrod reached his 12th year, he gave them to him. So again, those of you might be thinking, okay, well, how does this fit in with the story of the Tower of Babel? Nimrod was the king of Babel. Okay, these garments had a wonderful property, it says here, according to the legends of the Jews. He who wore them was both invincible and irresistible. The beasts and birds of the woods fell down before Nimrod as soon as they caught sight of him arrayed in them, and he was equally victorious in his combats with men. The source of his unconquerable strength was not known to them. It says, they attributed it to his personal prowess, and therefore they appointed him king over themselves. This was done after a conflict between the descendants of Cush and the descendants of Japheth, from which Nimrod emerged triumphant, having routed the enemy utterly with the assistance of a handful of warriors. He chose Shinar as his capital. Thence he extended his dominion farther and farther until he rose by cunning and force to be the sole ruler of the whole world, the first mortal to hold universal sway. As the ninth ruler to possess the same power will be the Messiah. Wow. His impiousness kept pace with his growing power. Since the flood, there had been no such sinner as Nimrod. He fashioned idols of wood and stone and paid worship to them. But not satisfied to lead a godless life himself, he did all he could to tempt his subjects into evil ways, wherein he was aided and abetted by his son Mardon. This son of his outstripped his father in iniquity. It was their time and their life that gave rise to the proverb, out of the wicked cometh forth wickedness. The great success that attended all of Nimrod's undertakings produced a sinister effect. Men no longer trusted in God, but rather in their own prowess and ability, an attitude to which Nimrod tried to convert the whole world. Therefore, people said, since the creation of the world, there has been none like Nimrod, a mighty hunter of men and beasts, and a sinner before God. And not all this sufficed unto Nimrod's evil desire. Not enough that he turned men away from God, he did all he could to make them pay divine honors unto himself. He set himself up as a god and made a seat for himself in imitation of the seat of God. It was a tower built out of a round rock, and on it he placed a throne of cedar wood, upon which arose, one above the other, 4 thrones of iron, copper, silver, and gold. Crowning all, upon the golden throne lay a precious stone, round in shape and gigantic in size. This served him as a seat, and as he sat upon it, all nations came and paid him divine homage. Here we are, the Tower of Babel. The iniquity and godlessness of Nimrod reached their climax in the building of the Tower of Babel. See, Athena says that's narcissism, trusting in self rather than God. Yes. So let's go on, reading about the Tower of Babel, things that Genesis doesn't tell us. It says here, the iniquity and godlessness of Nimrod reached their climax in the building of the Tower of Babel. His counselors had proposed the plan of erecting such a tower. Nimrod had agreed to it, and it was executed in Shinar by a mob of 600,000 men. Wow. That reminds me. Did you guys know that it says in the Torah that 600,000 men came out of Egypt into the wilderness during the Exodus? 600,000 men, not counting the women and children. So yeah, very similar here, 600,000 men. The enterprise was neither more nor less than rebellion against God, and there were three sorts of rebels among the builders. The first party spoke, "Let us ascend into the heavens and wage warfare with him," with God. The second party spoke, "Let us ascend to the heavens, set up our idols, and pay worship unto them there." And the third party spoke, "Let us ascend into the heavens and ruin them with our bows and spears." In other words, according to this, the third party was looking to literally wage war with heaven. War declares war on heaven. Moving on here, it says, many, many years were passed in the building of the tower. It reached so great a height that it took a year to mount to the top. A brick was, therefore, more precious in the sight of the builders than a human being. If this is true and historical, then this is a good reason why God got a little bit irked about this. A brick, therefore, was more precious in the sight of the builders than a human being? It says here, if a man fell down and met his death, none took notice of it. But if a brick dropped, they wept, because it would take a year to replace it. My own thoughts here so far, I think some of this might be figures of speech, I think it might be a hyperbole. It took a whole year to get to the top. I think that might be a hyperbole, to say the least. But hey, again, I think that there could be some really interesting truth that we can gather from this. And this is not the only source, as far as I know. This is not the only source that says stuff like this. There are other ancient sources that also tell us of things like this, like how and we might read it a little bit later here, where it's like there were archers and warriors around in the city of Babel and climbing the tower and shooting arrows up into heaven, to try to waging war basically with God and with heaven. So anyways, let's continue here. It says, so intent were they upon accomplishing their purpose that they would not permit a woman to interrupt herself in her work of brickmaking when the hour of travail come upon her. What? In other words, a woman that's going to give birth, they wouldn't even allow her. So this is how much they were driven in their work in the tower. Must be done no matter what. So it says here, molding bricks, she gave birth to her child. Wow, like right there on the tower, basically. Tying it round her body in a sheet, she went on molding bricks. It doesn't say explicitly if Nimrod actually was behind all this, but if he was, that's quite the tyrant. That's quite the tyranny there. No way can you leave the tower, even for giving birth. It says here, they never slacked in their work, and from their dizzy height, they constantly shot arrows toward heaven. There you go, right there. Which, returning, were seen to be covered with blood. They were thus fortified in their delusion, and they cried, we have slain all who are in heaven. Thereupon God turned to the 70 angels who encompassed his throne, and he spake, go, let's go down, and there confuse their language, that they may not understand one another's speech. Thus it happened. Thenceforth none knew what the other spoke. Now again, in this particular story and in this particular context, again, I do think that there could be many languages. It's just that they were all just unified. They were able to understand each other very, very, very effectively and efficiently. So the confounding of their language was just simply that. Just basically almost like destroying the automatic translator mobile devices. I'm just saying, I'm not saying that they could have had it, but God destroyed. What do you call that? EM, electric magnetic pulse, EMP. Would that be it? Where it's like it just destroys all the electronic equipment, boom, all destroyed. Like a magnetic explosion, if you will, that destroyed their technology of translating and interpreting and understanding each other so well. It says here, thus it happened, thenceforth none knew what the other spoke. One would ask for the mortar, and the other handed him a brick. In a rage, he would throw the brick at his partner and kill him. Many perished in this manner, and the rest were punished according to the nature of their rebellious conduct. Those who had spoken, quote, let us ascend into the heavens, set up our idols, and pay worship unto them there, God transformed into apes and phantoms. Those who had proposed to assault the heavens with their arms, God set against each other so that they fell in the combat. And those who had resolved to carry on a combat with God in heaven were scattered broadcast over the earth. As for the unfinished tower, a part sank into the earth, another part was consumed by fire, only 1/3 of it remained standing. The place of the tower has never lost its particular quality. Whoever passes it forgets all he knows. The punishment inflicted upon the sinful generation of the tower is comparatively lenient. On account of rapine, the generation of the flood were utterly destroyed, while the generation of the tower were preserved in spite of their blasphemies and all other acts offensive to God. The reason is that God sets a high value upon peace and harmony. Therefore, the generation of the deluge, who gave themselves up to depredation and bore hatred to one another, were extirpated, root and branch, while the generation of the Tower of Babel, dwelling amicably together and loving one another, were spared alive, at least a remnant of them. Beside the chastisement of sin and sinners by the confounding of speech, another notable circumstance was connected with the descent of God upon earth. One of only 10 such descents to occur between the creation of the world and the day of judgment. It was on this occasion that God and the 70 angels that surround his throne cast lots concerning the various nations. Each angel received a nation, and Israel fell to the lot of God. To every nation a peculiar language was assigned. Hebrew, where are we here? Hebrew being reserved for Israel, the language made use of by God at the creation of the world. And some of the things that I remembered from years ago when I first read that is the reason why God didn't destroy the people from the tower as opposed to destroying the entire everybody from the flood. And again, it's like, the people in the tower were more, even though they were pretty brutal and ruthless and some of the stuff that it says there, if it's historical, at least they had a general consensus of unity and to band together and to take this upon themselves as a team, as opposed to the people in the flood that were all just basically just hating each other so much that they were destroying each other all the time. So let's get back to the book of Genesis here. So it says here in verse 3, so they said to one another, let us make bricks and bake them thoroughly. Again, this is from the New King James. They had brick for stone and had asphalt for mortar. And they said, come, let us build ourselves a city. See, number one, a city and a tower whose top is in the heavens. Let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be scattered abroad over the face of the earth, of the whole earth. Okay, so a few notes here. Number one is the city is mentioned first. As I mentioned earlier, this whole story of the Tower of Babel actually talks about the city of Babel more than the Tower of Babel. So here we are again. The city is first and foremost. Build ourselves a city first and a tower whose top is in the heavens. I believe this is a figure of speech. I don't think it is literally talking about a tower whose top reaches the heavens. It's impossible. I mean, literally impossible. You know how, my grandmother used to, if something really stunk really bad, she would always say, it stinks to high heavens. Now, of course, that's not literally, stinking to high heavens, but of course it's a figure of speech, and she would always say that kind of thing. What I understand this to mean, in my own estimation, is that this tower was a symbol of the pride of the city, and it was the pride that actually reached into the heavens, figuratively speaking. like the pride of the people, almost like how it says in Isaiah about Lucifer, I will ascend into the heavens. Thy pride, it's got to do with pride. It's got to do with lifting themselves up figuratively, spiritually. Like we will be just as powerful as God. Because in the scriptures, the term heavens or heaven in some places is synonymous with God. I'll give you an example. In the book of Daniel, we have the story of Nebuchadnezzar, and it says that he was to become like an animal until he acknowledged that God reigns. And then it says a little bit later that he's to become an animal until he acknowledged that heaven reigns. So we got this interchangeableness of these two words, heaven or heavens and God. So we already have that in the scriptures where it talks about the kingdom of heaven, for example, in the book of Matthew, whereas the kingdom of God, the very same parable, the very same teaching. So we have heaven and God are used interchangeably. Like I will ascend, or I will acknowledge that heaven rules is basically the same thing as saying I acknowledge that God rules. So I think this is very important to understand. In the scriptures, even in the New Testament, we have heaven and God used interchangeably. The Gospel of Matthew likes to use the term kingdom of heaven, whereas the other Gospels like to use the term kingdom of God. The term kingdom of God is used more for the very same story, the very same parable, the very same teaching, the very same quote from Yeshua, from Jesus. It's just that one person likes to use the word heaven, whereas the other person likes to use the word God, but it means the same thing. So in the very same way, like in the same way as Daniel, in the same way as the Gospels, I think that this word heaven or heavens is just literally talking about God. In other words, let us build ourselves a city and a tower that represents our pride that reaches the heavens. Like we will be as God. Our city is going to be so powerful because of our communication network that we have going on here. We have this networking and this communication system that is the best in the world. And because of this, we're going to be like God. We are going to reach to the heavens, so to speak. Figuratively speaking, not literally, not physically. Because you can't even climb, you can't even climb Mount Everest, let alone, without basically dying because you don't have any oxygen up there so high, right? It's impossible to get anywhere near, quote unquote, heaven, if you will, in a literal physical way, without dying long before you get there because of the lack of oxygen. However, figuratively speaking, spiritually, yeah, people are like, they do exalt themselves up to the heavens, so to speak. And this just came to me. I think that, even Yeshua himself said, woe to you, Chorazin, you are exalted into the heavens, but you will be brought down to hell. So even in the New Testament, where we got Jesus talking about a certain city that was exalted into the heavens, well, what is he talking about? What does that mean? Does that mean that particular city, Chorazin or Bethsaida, was actually fulfilled the mission of Babel and went into heaven? No, I think it's a figure of speech. I think it's talking about pride. You exalted yourself to the place of God, buddy. Like this is massive pride. You are you're lifting yourself up so high into the heavens, so to speak. So that's what I understand this to mean. And I think this is the most reasonable, down to earth, and logical conclusion to come to, the most plausible conclusion to come to, is this kind of interpretation. I understand that a lot of atheists are fed. Atheism is fed with these kind of stories that are taken too literally. Same with the story of Noah and other stories. In this, the Genesis chapter 1, we already spoke about all that. Again, I think if we look at it in a more practical way, because God is a practical God, in a more logical way, and also, again, expanding our field of thought and not just looking at it with a mind that is so narrow, but rather encompassing all of truth and the evidence that we have in front of us. I think the best way to interpret this is that these people under the leadership of Nimrod were a people of great unification and communication and networking, and their pride, their goal was to basically be like God, to make themselves into God or gods whose top is in the heavens. So that's what I understand this to mean. His top is in the heavens, as not literally, but rather basically the head of the city of Babel will be like God. Okay, let's move on. Verse 5. But the Lord came down to see the city and the tower. Again, talking about the city first, and the tower which the sons of men had built. The Lord came down to see. Can't he see from where he is? I know that sounds like a stupid question, and I may be sounding like a little bit of a smart aleck by saying this, but a serious question, because we spoke about this concept several times over the past few months. You know, we have this kind of thing going on here in Genesis chapter 11 and Genesis chapter 18 as well, when God hears the prayers of the people who are complaining about the sin of Sodom and Gomorrah, and he said, I'm going to go see if it's true. If not, I will know. Here, again, we have the Lord came down to see. Why did he come down? It says he came down to see. He came down to see the city and the tower, which the sons of men had built. Now, I would say that it is possible that the reason why the Lord came down to see is exactly the same way, the exact same reason why he came down to see in the days of Sodom and Gomorrah in Genesis chapter 18. It's because he is responding to prayer. Now, if the legends of the Jews or if that story is just even half true, there would be a lot of prayer against Nimrod and against the rulers of Babel. And so, again, I think that from creation onward, I think that God waits. God doesn't move without being invited. It's like he doesn't do anything without being invited. At least, I mean, maybe I shouldn't say that in an absolute way, but you know what I mean. Like there's the story of Noah. We dealt with that, where it says in the book of Enoch that it was the souls of men that have perished, and because of basically it was the victims of the iniquity and the violence of the giants and the Nephilim. Their prayers went up to the gates of heaven, and God responded because of their prayers and sent the flood. So here again, we don't have it in the book of Genesis. It doesn't tell us explicitly, but I would suspect that this is the reason why the Lord came down to see, for the very same reason as he did in Genesis chapter 18 in response to prayer. So these people that suffered, especially those, again, if it's true, that perished because they were less valuable than the bricks, and their friends and their family all praying for them, and the souls and the spirits of those who have went on and have been so unjustly treated, their prayers could have caused God to react in this way. God came down to see. Does he see everything? Does he know everything? Well, in this, again, we could, there's a lot of scriptures actually that present this kind of idea. Again, it appears like he didn't see everything, and that's the reason why he had to come down to see. Otherwise, why would he come to see something that he already saw, that he already sees? It's like, why are you coming, Lord? Well, I'm coming to see. Well, don't you see? Well, yeah, I see, but I'm coming to see. Verse 6, and the Lord said, indeed. So again, it presents this in the same way as it presents the story of Sodom and Gomorrah in Genesis chapter 18, verse 20. The Lord said, because the outcry against Sodom is great. What outcry? This would be the prayers of the people, the outcry of God's holy, righteous ones, the Siddiqim, okay, the Siddiqs, if you will. The prayers of God's righteous people they're crying out against Sodom and Gomorrah. And because of the outcry, it says, so the Lord said, because the outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah is great, and because their sin is very grave, I will go down now and see whether they have done altogether according to the outcry against it that has come to me, and if not, I will know. So this verse presents a huge problem for those who would adamantly say that God sees everything, God knows everything. So if that's the case, what's he doing here? Is he lying? Why would he go down to see if he already sees? And what does this mean? God says, because of the prayers of the people that I hear against Sodom and Gomorrah, I want to go and see whether or not it's true. I want to go and see whether or not it's really that bad. So I want to go and find out. and I'm going to go see whether it's that bad or maybe it's not that bad. Well, if not, I will know. I'll find out. So it's the same kind of thing as I see it in Genesis chapter 11, verse 5, where it says the Lord came down to see this city and the tower which the sons of men had built. Okay, verse 6, and the Lord said, indeed, the people are one and they all have one language. So look at this. So God notices, again, the first thing he notices is the unification. They are Echad. They have a very, very strong network. Communication is just prime. It's just absolutely amazing. Their communication is just as fluid can be, in spite of the fact of, potentially many different languages there at the time. But they are one. They're Echad. Just like the man and the woman, when they get married, they become one, Echad. So all the languages, all the communication is Echad. It's all one. It's unified. So God is like, whoa, look at this. This is something. Now I tell you, like they really got some tight network going on here. And this is what they begin to do. Now nothing that they propose to do will be withheld from them. Come, let us go. Again, let us, the plurality of God. Come, let us go down and there confuse their language, that they may not understand one another's speech. Let's just drop that magnetic bomb, so to speak, and so just wipe out their AI translation system, wipe out the ability for them to understand each other. I do believe that God is a lot more practical than people think that he is. I think that he works in practical ways. I think he uses practical means to do his will. I know he uses supernatural too. Definitely, he's a supernatural God, but I do believe he's very practical. So here, God is threatened. Even he got threatened. He feels threatened here by the power of these people because of their unification, their unity. Their communication system is so tight and it's so efficient and so fast. Even God says nothing that they want to do will be impossible for them. That's how powerful communication is, right? The communication, the networking. Wow. Let's see what the other manuscripts have to say about this. The Septuagint. And the Lord said, behold, there is one race, that's weird, and one lip of all. I do think this is a figure of speech, meaning that all of these people are united, and they can all understand each other, either because of the technology that they had or because of the knowledge that they had. Whatever the case is, they all understood each other in spite of the many languages. And they have begun to do this, and now nothing shall fail from them of all that they have undertaken to do. In other words, nothing will be impossible for these people. They are too powerful. We need to do something about this. These people are too powerful. We need to stop it, because it's a very bad thing for a sinful society to have too much power. It's unacceptable for God. So God has to pull the plug on their, instant translation systems or whatever the case. God had to pull the plug on them, because they were to the point where even they were a threat to God. That's how much power they had. That's how much of a threat they were. God had to step in himself and say enough is enough. The Syriac from the Aramaic translation says, the Lord Jehovah said, behold, the people are one and they all have one language, and thus they have conceived to do. Therefore, nothing would be taken from them that they have conceived to do. Okay. The Latin. He said, behold, it is one people, and all have one tongue, and they have begun to do this. Neither will they leave off from their designs till they accomplish them indeed. Okay, let's see what we have going on here in the Samaritan text. So in the Samaritan, up to this point, it's all about the same. It's pretty much the same as the Masoretic. The Samaritan, I'm reading from Genesis chapter 11, verse 6, and Shema said, again, sometimes it says Elohim or God, but here it's like Shema. And Shema said, behold, they are one people, and they all have the same language, it says here. In the Masoretic says one, again, Echad language. And this is what they began to do. And now nothing which they will join together to do will be impossible for them. So the difference here in the Samaritan text is that instead of it's saying nothing which they purpose to do will be withholden from them, it says nothing that they will join together to do will be impossible for them. So in the Samaritan text, we have more of an emphasis on nothing which they join together to do will be impossible for them. So it's more of an emphasis on the actual unity again in the Samaritan. And I do have to say, I don't think that it's necessarily, again, the language, like one language, as in everybody spoke English or everybody spoke Hebrew, whatever the case was. Everybody spoke Babylonian, I don't think it's that, because it doesn't make sense, really. It doesn't make sense. Why would God be threatened by one city that all speaks the same language? It doesn't make sense. But if you have one city in which everybody is Echad, like everybody, there's nobody, everybody's all of one, like literally Echad. These people are like just unified, like unified as never been before. Then I could say, yeah, I could see, especially if it's a bigger city as well, and their communication is just fluent. Even if they do speak different languages, they can understand each other somehow, translated or whatever. Then yeah, I can see, that this can be quite the, you got quite the unit going on here. There's power in unity. Okay, so again, let's just have a peek here. That verse where it says, let us go down, it says, come, this is a Samaritan, come, let us go down, and there confuse their lips, that nobody will understand another speech. The Masoretic text is very similar but different. The Masoretic text says, come, let us go down, and therefore confound their lip, singular, lip. Oh, I just noticed this. So the Samaritan does put it in such a way like there are different languages. Because I just noticed this. The word for languages is lips, right? So in other words, in the Samaritan, it would literally say, come, let us confuse their languages. So they already had many different languages. It's just that they were all so unified, and they were all able to understand or translate somehow. And here it's God says, let's go confuse their languages now, so that nobody would understand another speech. So there was more than one language, more than one quote unquote lip or a Saphah, according to the Samaritan. Very, very interesting. So the Masoretic text, again, I know this is kind of crude to do it this way, but the Masoretic text is on this side. It says, this is translated from, it's a different translation of the Masoretic text, but notice it says lip as in one, like one language. Whereas the Samaritan over here says lips, right there, you see that, lips, okay? As in many languages already before the confusion actually even happened. Amazing. So the Septuagint says, come, and having gone down, let us there confound their tongue, that they may not understand each the voice of his neighbor. Syriac, come, let us descend, and we will divide there the language, so that a man will not hear his neighbor's language. Okay, and the Latin, come ye therefore, let us go down, and there may not understand one another's speech. A little bit simplified there, as the Vulgate usually is. Two more verses, guys. Genesis chapter 11, verse 8. So the Lord scattered them abroad from there over the face of the earth, of all the earth, and they ceased building the city. Again, city. Again, we have the city emphasized more than the tower in this story, in spite of the fact that everybody knows it as the Tower of Babel. It should be called the city of Babel, or the city of Babylon, or the city of Proto-Babylon. Okay, and then verse 9, therefore its name is called Babel. And again, see what it says here in the footnotes. Babylon. It even tells you here, Babylon. Literally confusion. Babylon. Yeah, so it's the same thing. Babel, Babylon, same difference. Therefore its name is called Babylon, Babel, confusion, because there the Lord confused the language of all the earth, and from there the Lord scattered them abroad over the face of all the earth. Now again, you know what my question is here before I jump in the live chat with you guys? My question is, and let's have a look at this in the Hebrew. The word earth, is that Eretz? The word earth down here, is that Eretz? So we got, how many times does it say earth in verse 9 here? Twice. If it's Eretz, as y'all know, then that doesn't necessarily mean the whole earth. It should say whole land if it's Eretz. We'll see if it is. Because that land could be any part of land. It could be any parcel of land. Anything from a field to a country, county, state, province, whatever, continent, nation, could mean anything. So let's go take a look at this word again in the Hebrew, and I'm thinking it probably is Eretz. Let's have a look here on the left-hand side. I'm going to go down here to verse 9. In the interlinear Hebrew, therefore it is because the Lord did confound their language of all the earth. Eretz, it is Eretz. That's the first one. And they scattered abroad upon the face of all Eretz. Okay. So these people, the original Babylonians, were scattered across, it shouldn't say all the earth. It shouldn't. It should say all the land, because it could mean any part of the earth. It probably means that particular part of the local part of the land, the plain of Shinar and the surrounding cities is probably what it means. That the people of the first original Babylonians, led by Nimrod, they were scattered across all the land of Shinar, the land, and then settled in the surrounding cities somewhere. That's more like it, in my opinion. So there you have it, folks. The Tower of Babel. I don't believe that there was one language before the Tower of Babel, for all the reasons that I just mentioned. We got the Samaritans saying languages. We got Genesis chapter 10, the chapter before, mentioning languages of each one of the many different languages there. And I think that this whole thing about the building a tower to the heavens is just a figure of speech, or figuratively speaking, that this city, because of its unification and its pride, it was being built up to the heavens, just like how Jesus was talking about Capernaum. Matthew chapter 11, verse 23. This is Jesus speaking, and thou, Capernaum, which art exalted unto heaven. Well, Capernaum wasn't in heaven, okay? It didn't have a tower going up into heaven, okay? So this is this is a figure of speech, not literal. Again, speaking of the pride of the people of the city. Their pride was reaching heaven, basically. In other words, they basically counted themselves as powerful and as good as God. And also Luke chapter 10, verse 15, and thou, Capernaum, which art exalted to heaven, shall be thrust down to hell. Yeah, so again, this is a figure of speech, and I do believe this is the same kind of figure of speech that we read in Genesis chapter 11, verse, what would this be now? Verse 4. Yep, the tower, the city, build ourselves a city and a tower, whose top is in the heavens, just like how Capernaum was exalted to heaven, okay? Lord willing, tomorrow we will get into Genesis chapter 11, the last part of it, the last 22 verses actually. Genealogies again. And this is even worse than the genealogy of Genesis chapter 10, because here we have not only the genealogy of this man begot this man, which begot, this father begot this son, and that one became the father of this one, and that's what we had in Genesis chapter 10. And even then we had discrepancies and contradictions, even more so with Genesis chapter 11, because it gives us numbers, years, similar to Genesis chapter 5. So we're going to be tackling that tomorrow, Lord willing. Put your thinking cap on and get your pen and paper or note-taking app ready for tomorrow, because it's going to be quite thorough, as usual. It's going to be quite thorough, and I'm going to be revealing information that I know a lot of you have not heard yet. Okay, let's see what's going on here in the live chat. Athena says, yes, God is a gentleman. Yes, in regards to, I've seen this. I do believe that God doesn't really move per se, be it in blessing or revival or through judgment or whatever the case is, unless prayer precedes that. This is what we were talking about earlier. Actually, the song that I sung earlier there, called Dangerous Tribe, is about that. That sometimes the people of God need to just kind of say enough is enough, and then we're going to pray that God intervenes and does whatever he needs to do to stop the vexation that's going on in society today, and the wickedness that's pervading society. And I do believe that he will, I do believe that he will. The Tzaddikim prays and God answers. The righteous, the saints, if you will, the righteous pray and God answers. Hubert says, it sounds like they had the technology to fight a war in heaven if if nothing was impossible. Amazing. Yeah, that's you know what? I wouldn't be all that surprised if Babylon, and let's say even the generation of the flood, and even before that, I wouldn't be surprised if these people had like technology that was even more powerful than our technology. Because you think about this, and yeah, like that's awesome, Cubers. Think about this as well. If it was technology, which it could be, it could have been technology. How else would they be so unified? So much so that even God himself was threatened by it. Like you think, so if they had technology so powerful that even God himself was threatened by it and he had to step in or else nothing would be impossible for these people. If it was technology that was the factor, if it was technology that was the tool that they were using, I would think that it must have been technology that was even more advanced than our technology. I mean, hey, I don't know, but I'm just saying that if Babylon did have technology, which is possible, and this technology was so powerful that even God himself was threatened to the point of saying, I got to do something and do something now, destroy their technology, however he did that, what do you call it? EMP, electromagnetic pulse, whatever, solar flare, whatever, something that would knock out the technology. I mean, if that is what happened, I would say it would, that technology, the technology that they had must have been a lot more advanced than what we have, because, well, so far, God hasn't stepped in to destroy the technology that we have yet. Yeah, it's right. Yeah, for sure. Thank you, Cuberts. Everybody knew the goal. Yes, in Babel. Yeah, it seems like everybody was committed to it. They even went to their death because of it. Like they were just tight. They were locked tight in one mission, definitely. Echad. Athena says, if Elon Musk hasn't come across heaven yet, the tower must be a figure of speech. Absolutely, I agree, Athena. That's for sure. Hey, Elon's tech hasn't caught up to Nimrod's yet, says Cuberts. There you go. Yeah. Cubert says, how many people pray against wickedness? There you have it. I think that is really where it's at. I really think so. I think that we have too many complacent believers. Yeah. The modern church says, Cubert says, the modern church doesn't preach that type of prayer. Yeah, it's true. It's true. And, if you read the Psalms, and I know you know this, and some of you, others of you that are listening to this, you know this, I believe that the Psalms are, by and large, the words of Yeshua himself. But the Psalms praise against the enemies. Psalm 94, Psalm 35, Psalm 109. Prayer against the enemy. Prayers against the enemies. Just praying that God would have... And it reminds me of Revelation. The prayers of the saints, the martyrs, talk about the Zedekim, the Zedek, the saints, if you will. The martyrs that are already, like they're clothed in white. They're like at the top of they're at the cream of the crop. And what are they doing? They're praying for justice. Oh Lord, how long, O Lord, until you avenge our blood? It doesn't say they're up there praying, oh God, just let them go, just forgive them all. It doesn't say that. It doesn't say that's what they're praying. They're praying, how long, O Lord, until you avenge our blood? And I know, I can just imagine, because I would do it. If I heard myself say this like 30 years ago, I would say, yeah, but Jesus said, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. To that, I know better now. I would say to myself 30 years ago, I would say, yeah, but you look it up, that is only found in the Gospel of Luke, and that is only found in the later manuscripts, not the earlier ones. So that was added in there by somebody. Somebody thought it was just nice. Oh, maybe there's a rumor going around that that's what Jesus actually said, but is that what he said? Or did he actually fulfill the Psalms the way that the Gospels say that he did? And if he did fulfill the Psalms, he wouldn't be praying like that. He'd be praying against them. I don't think that he would be super bitter against them, don't get me wrong, but rather just pouring out his soul unto God and asking God again for justice, and asking God to extinguish the wickedness. So yeah, the Father forgive them, they know not what they do is not found in the earlier manuscripts. So that is pretty much all but proven to be another forgery that was written in there by somebody later on down the road, giving out the facts. This is Luke chapter 23, verse 34, and I'm reading from the New King James Version, and it says, "Then Jesus said, 'Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they do.' And they divided his garments and cast lots." Now, there's a footnote here. God bless the little footnotes, and the footnote says the NU text brackets the first sentence as a later addition. What's the first sentence? The first sentence is the whole thing about Jesus saying, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they do." That's it. Later addition, it says. Yeah, so, okay, so we're going to wrap up here, and I love it when you got, a Bible that has all these footnotes about the manuscripts and that kind of stuff. I think everybody needs to really pay close attention to that stuff. I think it's really important. Yeah, so Lord willing, we'll be back same time, same place tomorrow, and we got quite the study tomorrow when it comes to the genealogies again, and the ages, the years, the differences between the texts are very significant. So once again, fasten your seatbelts. We're in for another doozy tomorrow. Hundreds of years difference between the manuscripts. Lots of stuff going on here.